Thank you, Simon, for once again giving me a chance to talk at Property Portal Watch. So I don't think Simon said it. So just for those of you who haven't seen me before, I've been in classifieds for over 13 years. I used to run M&A at NASPers in the really early days. And I now run a company called EIV, European Internet Ventures, which does capital raising and M&A purely for classifieds and marketplaces. And although we are called European Internet Ventures, we're active throughout the world. So I'm going to tackle the subject today in three sections. First of all, I'm going to look at the challenges facing classifieds businesses today. I'm going to then dive into some of the disruptive models, many of which other speakers have kindly introduced this afternoon. And then finally, I'm going to finish up with some paths to value creation, which I think are real options for especially the classifieds verticals and horizontal players who are on this conference. So first of all, in terms of challenges, I think the obvious one to make is revenue growth is slowing. If you look at the main players, the quoted players, their rates of growth were slowing well before COVID. And if you take a glimpse at some of the 2020 numbers, we're talking about zero or negative growth. Despite that, guess what's happened at the valuation level? The stock market valuation of those players that are quoted or groups of quoted companies has actually more than doubled since June of last year, which was when I was on stage last in Miami. So it's doubled from 150 to $300 billion. Now, a large chunk of that, 60 to almost 70 actually, is a Chinese company called KE Holdings, which I'll talk about later on, which is, in my view, the biggest property marketing portal business in the world by far. And you can see there the whole list of other players and quite how much they have grown. And what's really interesting is you look at the ones which have grown the most. So here I'm just showing you on the scale the increase in growth since June of last year. And look, some of the biggest growth of all these transactional marketplaces like Carvana and Zillow have seen double-digit billion-dollar increases in market cap. And then also some of the global vertical leaders. So companies that do one thing globally, like CoStar for commercial property, by the way, still doing very well, also in there. Of course, M&A has played a part in raising valuations. Look at Adevinta or Scout, and so on. So interesting enough, there have been these have been the key drivers to valuation growth. And one good reason for valuation growth is the fact that the markets which these players are addressing are huge, right? You know, property transactions, about $100 billion a year in the US in commission value. Just the commission value, the commission pot available is $100 billion, or in Europe, it's around 33 billion. And rentals is also a double-digit billion-dollar business in both places. But despite that, the size of the market, the classic classifieds models are not very good at capturing a very large chunk of that. Zillow, who's incredibly successful if you look at their listings business, and the jury is out on their home buying business, but on the listings business, their listing fees equate to about 2% of a typical agent's commission. Rightmove in the UK, I guess it's around 3%. And of course, if we look at emerging markets, and we've got on this call people in Africa, we have people in Latin America, for example, elsewhere. There, of course, it's even harder if you apply a subscriptions model. It's even harder to actually get high levels of monetization. If you look on this chart, we've got the revenue of the player divided by the internet population of the country. RIA in Australia is the king. They've got $25 US dollars per member of the internet pop, and a lot of the key European players around 5. If you move across to emerging markets, you've got to adjust by a factor of 50 or 100 lower to see what kind of monetization we're getting, admittedly in these large countries, often with very smaller property buying sections. And interestingly enough, the player that's doing the best is Zameen in Pakistan, who are actually not getting much of their revenues from subscriptions at all, but actually largely from commissions on new developments. Now, this is something I wanted to share today as well. It's to try and map out the competitive landscapes, which for each around the world. So you can see the interplay between horizontal dominated markets, which are on the lower part of the chart, and vertically dominated markets at the top. And by dominated, I mean, we're talking about, is there a clear leader that has, say, at least 2x, 3x the traffic of the number two? So in terms of horizontals, in my view, if you look at real estate traffic, there are probably just a few, Sahibinden in Turkey, Leboncoin in France, and Finn in Norway. If you look at vertical dominance, companies again like RIA in Australia, Rightmove UK, Zillow US, but the bulk of the world is in this competitive middle, where you neither have a dominant horizontal or dominant vertical. And just now and then something happens. For example, in Brazil, we heard yesterday the completion of the deal whereby the biggest horizontal acquires the biggest vertical. And there, of course, you're also in a great position to monetize. But my key point is, in most places in the world, the current structure does not encourage high pricing on the classifieds model. A quick reset on the classifieds, or a retro view on the classifieds journey. As you know, most players started off as classifieds 1.0, simple listings. A lot of them then added value-added services on top, such as databases and software and promotional features. And now most of the players I have seen are focused on trying to make money around the transaction, which usually means through mortgages and insurance in the property world. Very, very few have actually gone dead into the transaction, where the actual transaction is taking place on their platform or through their people. And the best two I can think of are Zillow and Zamin. So if you are banking on satisfying those investor expectations from being around the transaction, I urge you to learn from the experience of others. There's only one company I can think of that gets half its revenues from ancillaries, and that's Zoopla, who went about specifically buying some of the largest players in this segment. Otherwise, most other companies, it's a fraction of their revenues and even lower fraction of EBITDA, because the EBITDA margins are much lower. And guess why those EBITDA margins are lower? It's because whereas from a listings point of view, an agent, for example, in the UK, can only go to Rightmove or Zoopla really if they want to have a high volume of leads. And therefore, of course, Rightmove and Zoopla can charge a lot for it. If you're a consumer looking to buy a mortgage, you are spoiled for choice. And that's clearly why it's much harder to make money around the transaction, unless, of course, you're making that transaction. One other reason why I think classifieds are not very good at monetizing the opportunity around them is because they live off, traditional classifieds lives off a broken consumer experience. And just as Babak was saying, couldn't agree more. We're used to that seamless end-to-end experience, buying a smartphone on Amazon, the search, the comparison, the transact, the payment, the delivery. And whereas if you look at what classifieds is trying to do, yes, it's good at listing and helping you to compare and find what you want. And then what happens? You get pushed out to connect with an agent who will almost invariably help you complete a transaction which is fully offline. And that, of course, takes away the opportunity of the classifieds platform to generate a higher share of that commission. Other reasons for concern for classic classifieds models are a huge dependence on intermediaries. That was always the model. Post-COVID, I think it's more precarious. Why? Because I think the high cost, high street presence makes much less sense now. And it, of course, it's much harder when you can't have face-to-face contact with an agent. It's that much harder for that agent to actually show their value as a professional advisor. And of course, we also have those high-tech, highly funded tech-enabled brokerages, which I'll also be talking about a bit more in a few minutes. And then the final thought to wrap up this first section on challenges is that I found about $17 billion of capital that's been raised in the past 5 years or so for real estate models, most of which are there to compete with traditional classifieds. The big blue bars on the left are the US, where many billions of dollars have been raised for tech-enabled brokerages and iBuyers. And then the sort of the paler grayer bars are what's been happening in China, where a huge amount of capital has been raised, in particular for co-living and rentals platforms, which we'll also be talking about in a few minutes. So let's look at some of the disruptive models, and many of the speakers today have already introduced them to you. I'll just give you a quick overview here, and then I'm going to dive down a little bit over the next few slides. So of course, iBuyers, we've spoken a lot about them. Enough said, yes, they're much bigger in the US than in the rest of the world, but money is being raised around the world for them. Tech-enabled brokerages, as I've just mentioned, these are these non-high street businesses trying to benefit from offering a similar service to an agent, but in a more automated, modern online way. Thirdly, there are businesses, and this is perhaps less a confrontational than a collaborative model, where the portal is actually teaming up with brokers and doing a commission share with them. Most of these examples are in Asia. The big black box in the middle is KE Holdings, again, this $70 billion business, which is both the largest brokerage network in China, the largest portal in China, but interestingly enough, it also has the largest collaboration network with agents which are not part of the holding company. So very good example and very interesting. And this is a $6-7 billion revenue business. And in Europe, we just have a couple. We have Pronto Piso and Tapu in Turkey, which are also on the commission sharing model The fourth sales-based model is portal direct sales. We talked about Zamin. There are many countries around the world, especially in Asia, where, again, there is this teaming up and selling of new build through the portal for a commission. Then let's look at the rental models. So there are comparatively few rentals-only platforms. I think this is a huge mistake. Aptuna was on earlier on today. That's a great example of one, or Quinto Andar in Brazil. The benefit of having rentals-only platforms is you can provide a much more tailored end-to-end experience, and it's an opportunity to provide a transaction on the platform. And then there's also co-living platforms, which we'll talk about as well in a few minutes. So that's the overview. Let's take a quick look at one or two of them. Excuse me. First of all, the iBuyer. So to what extent is this model actually competing with classifieds? Clearly, from a seller perspective, I'm a homeowner, I want to sell my home. I love the process, right? It's all taken care of for me. It's fast. I don't have to employ an agent. I don't have to stage viewings. The weakness is, well, it's hard to scale. So it's hard to scale. If you are a seller, only roughly one seller in 50 actually gets a real offer from Zillow or whoever it is from Open Door. And as we've seen, that the model is quite loss-making. Zillow lost about $6,000 per property. Is it, and what are the implications for classifieds? I think that whoever goes into iBuyer gets very good at getting leads for people who want to sell their homes. But I don't think that iBuyer itself is a model with the sort of drive and network effects which we've seen in classifieds. So I don't actually see iBuyer as a huge threat to classifieds at all. The fact that iBuyer was less than 1% of all sales in the US last year, I think, confirms that. And Zillow, by the way, is very interesting. Zillow is the only classifieds player in the world that I've come across that's actually decided to go this way. Then when we look at the tech-enabled brokerages, I think that's a more interesting and fundamentally tougher challenge to classifieds in the coming years. Of course, they generate commissions, so they're getting $1,000 plus per sale. They have huge economies of scale. They're using a lot of tech, a lot of process management, and they benefit from network effects. Of course, it's tough starting up, which is why some of them have raised $500 or more million to get where they are today. But as they grow, they obviously get better and better unit economics. So I think, if interestingly for classifieds, these tech-enabled brokerages often start off as their best friends, they're their best customers. But over time, I think they can scale and become real threats. And interestingly enough, Redfin, which is one of the largest in the US, is already a top 100 company when it comes to traffic, pure traffic. So clearly, they will be less reliant on Zillow in the future. Let's look at two more models. I think these are more cooperative or collaborative. Could be easier for some of the networks, some of the classifieds players on this call to emulate. So commission sharing, clearly, if you're a portal, higher revenue per listing, sounds interesting. I can also attract brokers who don't like committing to a subscription, right? Who are not prepared to pay upfront. And portals are also by doing commission sharing, clearly they need to know, they get to know which leads have actually resulted in sales. So that helps them to understand the quality or the conversion ability of the leads which they're sending, and thus optimize their leads in a much better way. And it also, I think it works very well in non-exclusive markets, of which there are many, many around the world. Weakness is clearly, it's really difficult to do lead attribution, to know which lead has ultimately ended up in a sale with which broker. You need rigorous processes and good tech, and clearly there's always the wish to, or the attempt to game the system, which needs to be fixed and constantly monitored. I think the implications for classifieds are interesting. If you do a pay-per-performance model, you can really raise awareness of the value you're bringing to your broker clients. And by the way, pay-per-lead, in my view, is an interesting intermediary step to getting to commission sharing. It sounds less conflictual, confrontational, but ultimately pay-per-lead times enough and the right price per lead gets you to a very similar space. And for example, there's a company in Ukraine called Domria. It's the largest real estate vertical, which has moved from pay-per-lead over the past 6 to 12 months, and simply converting customers to pay-per-lead has raised revenues by 35%, interestingly. Then portal direct sales, we've talked about Zameen. It's not the easiest thing to do. You need to have dedicated teams. You need to build strong relationships with developers. The culture, the success drive of running your own sales team is a bit different from selling subscriptions. But clearly it is a huge opportunity to really monetize very nicely. And I've seen 10%, 12% of apartment values being offered as commissions. So that's sales. I think rentals, it's worth looking at rentals, which in my view have been the unloved cousins, the underlooked parts of many classifieds businesses. I think there are three sorts. There's the pure classifieds rentals players. Zumper in the US, Apartment List are good examples. So classic leads and listings model. Then marketplace, there are much, much fewer. So for me, a marketplace means the transaction has to happen on the site, and it means there have to be many buyers and many sellers. There are very few in Europe. Spotter Home, Move Bubble are the ones which come to my mind. And then in China, Zeroom is a very large version of this. And then thirdly, the platform play. So the platform is different from the marketplace in that the platform tends to either own the inventory or have long-term leases so that they have exclusive access to that inventory. So that by virtue of this, they're able to more tightly manage the whole experience of that whole customer journey of discovering the property and ultimately making the deal, signing the contract. So I think that getting to this 2020 app-based real sort of e-commerce-like experience, we're going to see that first in rentals. And rentals platforms are providing by far the most compelling experience. And if you think about, again, our sort of Amazon as the sort of 10 out of 10 where we want to be, classifieds is scoring the lowest points. Marketplace gets us already much closer in that, whether you're a marketplace or a platform, it's still possible to offer the end-to-end process. The main difference is the platforms tend to also offer longer term rentals, and they tend to offer also the in-life maintenance of the properties. Now, if you go this way and you become a marketplace or a platform, will you make more money? Well, the answer is at the moment, although there's more value added, there's not more EBITDA. Classic classifieds model, when it works well, maybe you're getting $20 per listing, 75% EBITDA margin. You're pocketing $15 for every rental which gets listed on your platform. Rentals marketplaces, the rental value for 6 months or more, depending on where we are in the world, could be, say, $3,000, take rate 8%. It's several $100s of gross profit. But every single case I have seen, the marketing costs are huge. And the cases I looked at here, I'm giving an example of $225 to acquire a customer who actually signs a rental contract. And of course, you have some other costs there as well. So today, the rentals marketplaces I've seen are all losing money, but over time, I can see a possibility to be earning maybe €100 or sorry, $100 per contract. And then the platform, remember, it's usually longer term, higher take, also getting involved in renovation, more at stake, losing more at the moment, potentially, but again, longer term potential to make several $100 per transaction. And one real life example, if you want to look at this in more detail, Danke Apartments in China, it's a listed business. They're incredibly successful from a volume market penetration point of view, several 100,000 units. They're losing over $600 per apartment. So that's an overview of the landscape. Hopefully it's given you some ideas on where things can go. I'd now like to share with you some ideas where I think very specifically portals, property portals, can act to attract and win a higher share of those large commission pools we've been talking about. So first of all, home sales. Let's look quickly at three different variants. The sort of the softer and simplest version, classified 3.0 plus. Make it more virtual. Some of the themes we've heard already on the calls today. Make it more visual. Make the content, video walkthroughs, 360 degrees. Get far away from static listings to a much more engaging YouTube-like experience. From a monetization point of view, think about adding conveyancing. We've been talking about it a bit today. Conveyancing marketplace is another way to earn money. But perhaps most interesting of all is starting to bring some of the fintech products that we've seen on a standalone basis in other markets. Why not you as a portal bring them to market? So for example, this bridging service, the fact that I can't buy before I've sold if I already own a home, this is elegantly taken care of by companies like Ribbon, that works collaboratively with agents, by the way, or Orchard. Why couldn't a portal apply the same, offer the same service? And now I know it requires a completely different funding profile, and that can often be outsourced, but the amount of data which a well-trafficked portal has gives them a huge advantage were they to wish to offer such services. Second model, I think, is also one step further to the pure e-commerce model. I've called it Shopify because, of course, as most of you know, Shopify provides solutions to enable classic bricks and mortar retailers to become e-commerce businesses. So it's providing that core underlying technology to digitize. So for agents who currently have not got away from the face-to-face paper pushing, a way of dealing with clients, viewings, and transactions, the idea would be that a portal would offer a whole end-to-end service, which could then be branded, co-branded with the agent's logo, for example, and the portal's logo. And this would simply turn that whole process, which, let's face it, most people have not done or have only done once or twice, turn it into a much smoother, app-based process where you can follow your way along a sort of a deal room experience. Now, if the portal is doing that, it'll probably improve engagement levels and transaction velocity on those portals, and should end up with offering the portal an opportunity to both charge fees for offering this service, and hopefully it opens the door towards the commission sharing. And there are a few first steps towards this. Pronto Piso in Spain, Tabu.com again in Turkey. They have an online transactions platform. They also, by the way, also do commission sharing with agents to make them also bring leads or bring buyers or sellers to the platform. And then, for example, companies like Beagle in Ireland are also digitizing that transaction process. And then the final version is own label tech-enabled brokerage. I think we should be careful about the semantics. I remember Mark Stilker was talking about owner occupies being an important part of that triangle on a portal. And I don't know whether we call it a souped up for sale by owner service or a tech-enabled brokerage, but it's basically the services required to help a homeowner or a would-be homeowner buy a home on that portal. I've called it a tech-enabled brokerage because it's basically the same aspect of providing the services necessary to help sell or to help buy a home. But I think that portals will eventually end up doing this. If they don't, then the Redfins of this world are going to get so big that it will make it, they will reduce the addressable market for portals. So if I was a portal, I would look at developing my own label, a tech-enabled brokerage, and I would still be an incredibly good customer for my, or a very good supplier for my agency partners, still provide them with all the great leads and listings I have done in the past. And if you, again, you think that this isn't, I'm dreaming, it's already happening in China. There are already over 500,000 agents who belong to this collaborative network of KE Holdings doing exactly this. So I have a feeling it will also be happening elsewhere in the world in the coming years. And then the last perhaps minute or two, rentals, similar idea. We can improve and digitize. I would encourage everyone who's doing rentals listings to think about creating a real marketplace for listings with an end-to-end online transaction process. And I think, you know, the examples Aptuno was on the call earlier today, Quinto Andara is doing this at scale. These businesses as standalones don't have the best unit economics. If you as a portal decide to offer that end-to-end rentals experience, your unit economics will be much, much more attractive. And agents, they can still do commission share, but you can really build up a huge business. It amazes me that we don't have any huge rentals marketplaces businesses in Europe yet. I'm quite sure we're going to see some soon. So that's basically it from me. I think as classifieds players, you can't, if you just rely on subscriptions and ancillaries, you're going to disappoint those investors. And to reignite growth, you need to look at some of the ideas I've been sharing with you today. And I think the upside in getting a proper share of those commissions way outweighs the potential downside of annoying a few of your agents. That's it from me. Thank you very much.